I'm about to make one of those bracelets that says WTNS because I sell it to companies all the time. It stands for what's the next step. And so a lot of times when you're paralyzed and you don't understand which way to move, what's the very next thing you got to do?
Welcome to Leading and Growing Your Real Estate Business. I'm James Short, and this show dives into the real stories behind the agents and the leaders shaping our industry. No polished highlight reels, just honest conversations about what's working, what's not, and how they're building businesses that actually grow. Each episode, I sit down with someone in the trenches, top performers, rising leaders, business owners who've cracked the code and others still figuring it out. We unpack the wins, the failures, the habits, and the lessons you can put to work straight away. Before we dive in, can I ask a favor? And please subscribe or follow on the platform you're listening or watching this. The more we grow, the bigger impact we can have together. And thank you. Let's get started. Ladies and gentlemen, strap your seatbelts in because we are about to go to another level. This next guest, all the way from the US of A, Scott Kinder from DOL Coach. He turns chaos into clarity and builds leaders who win. He's a former US Army Green Beret turned entrepreneur, author, and educator. He's led teams in the most demanding environments on earth, and now he teaches individuals and organizations how to apply that same discipline, adaptability, and execution mindset to business and life. As the founder of DOL Coach, he has built frameworks that cut through corporate noise and deliver real results. His models turn complex challenges into clear, actionable plans that actually work. He designs and teaches boutique project management certifications and leadership masterclasses built for high performers who want to win under pressure. His background in special forces, intelligence, and business allows him to simplify complexity, identify risk early, and execute when it counts. He doesn't do theory, he builds systems, leaders, and teams that win consistently. Whether it's leading organizational transformations, coaching executives, or teaching the next generation of project leaders, his mission is simple: discipline, execution, measurable results, and lasting impact. I've known Scott since, I think around 2013, 2014, when he was living in Sydney, now living back into the US. But mate, we've been mates ever since. And dude, brother, thank you for being on the show.
I'm looking for the guy you just introduced. When's he showing up? He sounds pretty good.
You guys are not bad, huh?
I'm happy to be here, man. Great. First of all, it's great to see your face. And man, there's not many people that immediately I answer that aren't former teammates that I don't answer the phone for. And you're always one of those. So God bless, man. Love your work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh man, we can go down so many holes. We can go down so many opportunities. But today I want to really focus on what you've been doing and also that leadership piece, because obviously those in the real estate space, we have a lot of real estate directors and principals and managers leading teams. But I want to find out, you've led so many teams, obviously in special forces, and you're training the special forces, and obviously in business and project management. Let's just get straight into it. Where do you find those leading teams today really fall down and don't get it right? And then what can they do about it?
It's interesting, right? Because there's no Chinese, I hope you live in interesting times. It's really a curse, right? It's meant to be a blessing. But I really like, and I think that we are living in interesting times, especially as markets are evolving, the global perspective. It's craziness that we live in sometimes in the very definition of interesting. So I think one of the biggest challenges I find with leaders is they get typecast internally or through some external focus, or I'm a Green Beret, or I'm a business guy, I'm an MBA, or I'm whatever. And that they try and take that leadership into every role. And I think you and I both know there's no round peg, round hole, right? The days of Steve Jobs being celebrated for just being this like go-to guy. Look at Elon Musk compared to Steve Jobs, both massive visionaries, but both have had to massively adapt their leadership styles because it is an evolving landscape that we live in. So I think that's the biggest challenge I see, is just telling people it's okay to not be that guy all the time. I'm not that guy all the time. I have to adapt. And as a younger generation comes into the workplace, they're throwing entire industries on their heads because they're saying, well, just tweak it. Why are you doing it that way? And us graybeards, right? We're going, oh, but we've always done it that way. And so we're having to learn. And that's one of the reasons I tell leaders, like, if you're not continually learning and growing, you're dying, literally.
So true. And that's what I want to jump on as well around those new young leaders coming through. They're asking more questions, they're exploring more options, they're really unpacking where from the older generation like you and I, it's just that's because we've already done that way. What are you noticing around these? Where does that question component and that curiosity come from with these young leaders coming through?
These things, right? They have
Yeah.
the world at their fingertips. They grow up with, it's amazing to me. My middle son at 18, I just spent a few days with him up in where he's playing soccer. And it was every time he had a thought about something, it was straight on to AI or whatever. Obviously, we grew up and Google came around and whatever, right? But the amount of just rote information they have, I'll be sitting in the living room watching a TV show with my oldest son, and my wife will ask a question about something, and he's just has the answer in 10 seconds. So I think it's just that instant access to information leads them to a no BS type of lifestyle, right? They're not used to the vagueness of just hang out and figure it out and take 6 months to play with this. They want that instant energy.
Yeah.
And they're just different. I teach in some of my courses, right? Like the difference in traditional or waterfall project management, agile and Kanban and stuff. But one of the takeaways from I tell every leader is if you work with a young generation of workers, limit work in progress. You and I, if I gave you, James, an exhaustive to-do list of 1,000 tasks, what do? You break out the knife and fork on the bit bright and you start just getting after it. You give a younger entry-level worker that same list and it's over. And I'm not saying this like condescending wise, it's overwhelming, but when you give them it's the same 1,000 task list, but you give it in 10 chunks at a time. You still get what you, but again, the dinosaurs, one of my favorite sayings is if you think you're a big animal in any field, it's only because you're a dinosaur.
Yeah.
And so as soon as you think that you're an expert, someone comes in and shows you just exactly how wrong you are.
Yeah, so true, so true. So you mentioned something about these younger generations and having access with their phones and obviously AI. It's a really interesting times, right? Because yes, we can get answers straight away from our phones and from all these AI platforms, but having the answer and knowing on a visceral level with actually getting it done, I see
How
there's
do
a
you
gap.
apply? Yes. Yeah, there's
Talk,
a massive gap. 100% agree with you. There's a massive gap in that I have all the answers, but you don't. So one of the things I was talking about is there's a massive difference in skills and experience, right? And or skills and knowledge per se. So you might go to a course and graduate the course and have an incredible amount, especially pedigree schools, universities, and programs and more doesn't give you any experience or skills into that specialty that you're trying to do. So those come with time. And again, not being condescending, but the older generation already bashed and said they have to learn to work with the younger generation. And I'll flip it and say the younger generation also have to realize that they're not perfect and there's a lot of things historically, right? Like in the 60s, it was the guys who grew up in the 50s thought the weird kids who grew up in the 60s were weird in the 70s and the 80s, right? So it's always this generational piece. It's not new by any means, but they have to realize that they can learn and that they don't possess through these devices or an iPad or whatever your tech choice is. They have access to information. Information is an experience and skills. And that's one of the benefits. I tell entrepreneurs all the time, and I'm assuming it would be the same for real estate agents. Everything I do in sales, I put through a lens of what I call the POD model. And it's so simple. Everybody, when I first mentioned it to them, gaps it off, but it stands for problem offering differentiator. And so the very first thing that captures your attention is when I solve a problem for you. My offering then seals your attention and keeps it. And then the differentiators seal the deal. But if you look all over LinkedIn and any type of business networking area, and you and I are both alumni of one of the prestige ones in Sydney, right? All that happens is they try and lead with differentiators all the time. And I did that for years and I was the poorer for it because, oh, I'm a Green Beret. I can solve any problem that you want. What do? I'm a Green Beret. I can solve any problem that you want, right? That's my differentiator. I should have ended the conversation with that after solving a problem. You seal attention with problems and offerings, you seal deals with differentiators. And that's what gives leaders that edge. And the differentiators come from experience and
yeah,
skills and knowledge in the marketplace as well. So that's going back to that continually growing, adapting, getting in the new areas.
so true. Coming back to some first principles around what you've learned through the US Armed Forces, the Special Forces, the Green Beret, what key principles on a leadership component are still true for today's leaders that we can really dig deep and explore? Because I think, yes, technology, yes, AI, yes, it's instant. But as you said, the skills and experience and knowledge and the implementation of that, but there would be some core principles for you that you teach from that history, from that background into today's leaders. What are some of those principles and areas?
You're gonna think I'm being flippant when I say this, but one of the things I have to remind people all the time, especially leaders as they grow into different arenas and different areas, right? Is look, calm is contagious. Very few business failures are truly fatal, right? They might hurt a whole lot. I've been through a bunch. They sting. They're never fun, but they're not fatal. So when you are that leader and you project that calm, the calm comes from experience because you weathered the storm before, right? You're like an old school boat captain that's seen the big waves and the titles and everything coming in, and nothing surprises you. And that's one of the pieces that that new generation of non-leaders don't possess yet is the ability to stay calm. We try to attribute all these tendencies of problem solving, being adaptable, and being sure those all make a Green Beret. But one of the best things that nobody ever talks about becoming a Green Beret is your ability to force multiply. It's taking a team, a small team, and making it act like a much bigger team. A 12-man special forces A team is meant to combat advise 1,000-person indigenous military force. And we saw in the early days after 9/11 and more, right, with the horse soldiers and all that. And force multiplication isn't a military paradigm, it's business 101. If I can do more with less, there's a quote that I give in my PM courses as well, and it says, accomplish more with less. Constraints breed resourcefulness and problem solving and more, right? And everybody looks at it, and then the attribution for the quote comes up and it says the Amazon way by Jeff Rossman. It's not a military quote. Amazon goes through the same constraints are there, right? So it's having that ability. I've survived all these storms. Calm is contagious. Through my calm, I can then understand the true operational environment through being situationally aware. Another two tenets of being a good special operator. Once I'm situationally aware, I can then put the correct problem solving pieces in place and make sure the puzzle pieces fit together, right? Otherwise, I just have 1,000-piece puzzle sitting on my desk and I'm looking at it in Petra. And so one of the things that I tell leaders, and we kind of laugh because it is dirt simple. David Allen wrote in his book, Getting Things Done, fantastic book. I think I've read 12 times. That sometimes when you're stuck, and I call it witness. Do you remember in the 90s, everybody, the Christians all had those like WWJD bracelets on? What would Jesus do with the beads, right? Yeah, I'm dating myself a bit here, right? But I'm about to make one of those bracelets that says WTNS because I sell it to companies all the time. It stands for what's the next step. And so a lot of times when you're paralyzed and you don't understand which way to move, what's the very next thing you got to do? Well, I got to pick up the phone and call James. Call James. What's the outcome of that? James answers. All right, then what are you asking James to do? So when you take this elephant, right? And here's the deal. I ran a course for private high school across the US a couple of years ago. And one of the kids had a question because my company, I got to be a guest lecturer in there and answer some questions, right? And I answered him and I wasn't being flippant, but I said, man, what they say, how do you eat an elephant? And there was 50 kids at a Zoom call and I had 100 eyeballs on me, go all big. And finally, one of them said, Mr. Kinder, is the elephant alive? I'm like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time is how, no, I'm not talking like animal cruelty here. It's just say, but my point being, we're not teaching that
Yeah.
anymore. I tell you, how do you eat an elephant? And you're like, dude, I started at the rear and I just worked my way. Or you tell me I've got my Gerber out and I'm already chewing, right? By the time the words are out of your mouth, like action breeds reaction, right? But when you react through a calm and professional manner, those principles survive. And that's one of the reasons that most Green Berets do exceptionally well if they can get over themselves in business, because it's not just that warrior. And I'd imagine it's the same as special operators in Australia, and I know several. It's the same mentality of calm is contagious. I'm going to understand the operational environment, not what I think it looks like or what I want it to look like, but what it really, truly looks like. And then here's the other kicker. 30% of projects fail around the globe because of poor communication.
Mm.
You and I are literally at different ends of the globe right now, and we're communicating seamlessly without any glitches. So we have the ability to communicate more seamlessly now than ever before. And yet, a full third of projects fail because of poor communication. So, another thing that leaders have to do is be able to communicate. And there's some things like, apologies, I'm on my soapbox now, but
Go, go,
when you
go.
communicate, it's not always like the status or when somebody messes up or whatever. You need to learn to communicate on both sides, out of both sides of your mouth, praise and improve. And one of the things that took me so long to learn as an executive, and it was even more rough for me because I was in Australia trying to learn it with a different culture and more, was praise. I was looking at things like, well, of course they did their job. He makes $200,000 a year. Why wouldn't he do his job? Because that was my mentality as a Green Beret and a team. My mentality as a leader, talking about paradigm shifts, is I need to praise constantly. And sometimes I feel like a cheerleader, but I'm like, man, that was a great sales call you had. That session went really well. And internally, I might be going, about time you did a good session. You had 10 mucked up ones I've had to correct. But when you communicate, you start getting buy-in. And that team buy-in, when you make a high-performing team, whether it's real estate or military or anywhere in between, you start to conquer your goals and to set those. And that's another piece of it. Communicate your goals. As a real estate executive, where do you want your portfolio to go? What does success look like to you for closing times, for turnarounds, for profit, for whatever? And communicate that both down and make sure that everybody is aligned. I get executives in their room and I start the junior person to say, what's the mission and vision of this company? And when they're done speaking, the CEO looks like he's about to vomit. And by the time the third or fourth junior person says it, I'm like, you guys aren't even aligned on any single aspect of this. And you're in the C suite. So these aren't brand new hires that I'm talking to, but we just got to align towards something uniform, communicate, and project calm when needed, which is more often than we think.
Love that. Wow, so many nuggets in that piece. Where do I begin?
I'm
Um,
done. I'm hanging up now. That
yeah,
was
yeah,
it. That's all
no,
I got.
no,
No.
boom, boom, drop that mic, drop that mic. And that's a really great piece, is that communication piece. Why do you think then leaders don't communicate? Where do they get it wrong around that communication piece? If 30% projects aren't completing, if people aren't knowing the vision, mission, and the goals and the vision of their organization, why aren't they communicate effectively? Where are they dropping the ball?
One, we assume as leaders that if I send an email, then you automatically understand every nuance of my email, including when I'm sarcastic or I'm being whatever or less than genuine. So again, I'm not anti-technology. I'm like the only guy I know that has one of these like Vision Pros, right? I love technology, but at the end of the day, a team's message isn't communication necessarily. It's so as to reasons, there's hundreds, but biggest ones are fear of looking. And I'll ask all the realtors who listen to this, right? Like think for a second when you've gotten tasked with doing something from somebody higher than you in the food chain at work, and you walked away and went, I really don't know what they wanted me to do. It seemed like they were telling me to do something. I don't want to go back and ask because I'm going to look like I'm an idiot. So fear drives so much lack of communication. I don't want to tell James that the budget's in jeopardy. I don't want to tell James I'm in trouble for the schedule or that I'm going to be late or that this is happening or the vendor backed out. And so fear drives a lot of it, but also just assumption of understanding. If I get you on a phone call or on a Zoom call and say, hey, James, this is what I want you to do. You good? Can you give me that? Yeah. And I hang up. I walk away thinking he's good. You
Yep.
walk away going, I think he was speaking English, but I'm not really sure what transpired there in the conversation. So it's just clearly communicating. And Donald Miller, in his book, Building a Story Brand, fantastic book, says you have to tell your teams on average something 7 times before it becomes. So that vision, when you just bring it all into the conference room one time and say, this is the vision for the company. They don't get it. When you bring them the second and third time and say, this is the vision for the company, a few might get it. Five, six, seven people start to get it. And so it's that reinforcement of the message. And a lot of people attribute that to this a negative, I'm over communicating. And again, I get laughed at constantly with people that I work with because they go, yeah, Scott, I know you told me. Then I'm like, then why the hell aren't you doing it that way? If why are we having yet another conversation and standards still aren't being met? And there's a whole other ball of wax I could get into about clearly communicating standards so that they are in fact understood and attributable by everybody within the organization.
Let's go there. Go for it. Yeah, let's unpack that standards.
Standards, what does it look like? So I first of all, I get accused of this all the time, so I'll just put this out there and I'll probably repeat it in a few minutes, but I am not a zero defect guy. You know me for over a decade. I have messed up so many times. I have failed so many times, right? Like I am not a zero defect guy. But one of the things I did learn in the military and special forces was if you set the standard here, and that person is wandering or floating somewhere below that standard, it is your job as a leader to get them back above it. Now, sometimes we all know the infamous performance improvement plan, right? The PIP, and we know all these things and all this stuff, but it's more than just an administrative exercise in documenting where they're not. I'm saying it's an academic exercise for you as well as a leader to say, I set the standards here. Maybe I set the standards too high. And when you look at being adaptable, maybe if I have to come up, when I was at the Institute of Project Management in Tasmania, I got one of the most hurtful comments that I ever had on a 360 feedback when I was a COO that said, I think Scott's watched too many Vietnam War movies because he has a necklace of scalps and ears from all the people he's fired around here. And I was third in charge of the Institute, and my bosses pulled me in a conference room. What do you think about this? I'm like, first of all, I can't fire anybody. I can only present them to you to be fired, and you guys have actually fired everybody. So why am I getting the blame? And secondly, like I've given them all the opportunity to get back up here. So either I'm not doing what you want me to do, which is setting the standard too high, or you're letting people just live beneath it. And once we set that expectation, again, kind of bow on it, going back to communication. And that's another thing that a lot of leaders do, right? They read an awesome book. They hopefully one of mine. They do something right. They set the standard and then they go, done. But they don't communicate it. Now people start failing and they go, I didn't realize the standard was here. So tying a little bit of a loose end and all that stuff, right? You got to communicate what the standard is, probably in excess of 7 times. You got to reinforce it with praise, not just negativity. And a lot of times underperforming people, and that's the kind of the negative jab that we graybeards throw out to the young. Oh, they don't have the same work ethic. Yes, they do. Oh, they don't have this. Yes, they do. They're just challenging you and daring to ask why you do it that way, which is great as an innovative guy. But if you're setting the standard here and nobody is able to get to it, maybe you're wrong. And a lot in my old A team, we used to say, look, if you're the guy that everything is always this is effed up and this is effed up and this is wrong and this is wrong, like maybe it's you. Maybe it's not everything else. Maybe you're the person. And so you got to be a bit introspective sometimes and be able to take on those things and understand that even if I own the company, it's not necessarily how I like to communicate. It's how James needs to be communicated with. It doesn't matter what I like. I need to get my ego out of the way. And there's a whole other ball of wax we could go down is this ego piece. But I'll stop.
One of the things I like want to jump on is that standard component, because what I see so often is those directors, principals, leading agents are running at a pace. I call it like they're running at a pace at 200 miles an hour and expecting their team to run at the same pace. And then it's, why aren't you running at my pace? Where realistically, they can only be running at that point in time at about 70 to 80 miles per hour. How can a leader be aware, one, be aware that they're running at 200 miles per hour and shift their pace back to that 70 to 80 and then build? What could they do around that?
Without sounding like I'm gaffing the question, because I'm not, it's understand that operational environment. One question that I would give that leader if I was coaching them, the principal and whatever, say, you benefit financially a heck of a lot more than those beneath you do, which is probably one of the reasons you're running at 200 miles an hour. If I'm making $1 million a year, it's easy for me to keep up this sprint, right? Because the carrot is nice and gold plated and hanging right in front of me. And it looks like a big filet mignon, right? Like it's massive. But if my team is only making $70,000 a year and has no incentive to do anything more than shuffle slowly behind me, it doesn't matter what I want them to do. They're never going to be as incentivized. So one of the problems with especially people that own outcomes is you might be highly incentivized, not to be ugly, but to make it that sprint and go, but your team isn't. And so how do you then incentivize them so that they are? And now the opportunities, sometimes it's education, sometimes it might be growth, personal development. You tick these boxes and then you can get here, right? You think of lawyers and how they go from associate and they put in all these hours to partner or residence in the medical field, right? So we understand academically in a lot of fields how this I got to show up as an intern type paid person to do this, and then the reward is here. But then in other fields there's no, it's hey, you're on the team, let's go start sprinting. And we don't hire the right people. You hire a mom of three that has three kids in school, in primary school, and she wants to be home to cook dinner and stuff. They're not going to be doing house showings at 8 o'clock at night for you, no matter how much you yell at them. You hired the wrong person for the role. So it's getting all these things right. And if anybody said leadership was easy, then I'd want to know who they are and what they're leading, because it's never been simple.
Exactly. So true. Now, talk to me about the books that you've written, and talk to me about the DO coaching programs.
I run certification programs as a platinum educational partner of the Center for Project Innovation, formerly based in Australia. Now we've moved it to the US. Love project management. There's not an industry out there that project management doesn't attach to. I'm not going to make this a sales pitch on my courses or whatever. I've written 6 books now, with the seventh coming out at Easter. Everything from quick guides to getting out of debt to achieving your vision to military transition. Obviously, that's a spot near and dear to my heart. But my biggest ones are the Green Beret's Guide to Starting and Running a Business and No BS Project Management, which I just got my first copies. It's been out a month, and I just got my first copy. Things like that thick. So I nerded out over that one, but as blunt as can be, and they're all on Amazon. But on Easter, I'm very proud. I was blessed after I disappeared in the Australian continent for a long time after my service to come back and be re-welcomed into my community of special operators. And some guys who I really thought were atheists historically were really, and I'm a devout Catholic guy myself, they were really preaching a lot. So I started wondering, like, in my book coming out, it's called Special Forces Brothers in Christ, and it's how people find light after the dark and whatever. So it's a passion project that I'm sure no real estate agent in Australia is interested in. But if you want the business one or the project management one, they get decent reviews, and
Love it.
I'll happily send James over some copies.
Awesome. Fantastic. And so where can then the audience go to find out more and get in contact?
DOLcoach.com. DOL, Delta Oscar Lima, is the De Oppresso Liber is the motto of the Army Special Forces. It means to free the oppressed. So I think that freedom through insecurities and idiocies and all that is a great oppression that holds a lot of people down. DOLcoach.com is my website. My email is scott@DOLcoach.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, and all the books are on Amazon, even Amazon Australia. So
Amazing. Scotty, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really appreciate we
brother,
could
I
be
talked your head off. I'm sorry, man.
No, I
Yeah.
love it. This is what I wanted. This is some amazing gold nuggets. So really appreciate your time, energy, and expertise. And mate, I'm looking forward to getting you back on the show shortly.
Awesome. Thank you.